So this is the panel discussion for Android development Q&A. We've got a lot of expertise up on the panel, and just like yesterday, we're going to get a lot of deep and insightful answers. But I want to start with your questions. Who'd like to kick everything off, get things going? Anybody doing any active Android development right now? Doing anything interesting with Gradle in your build process, or running into any roadblocks, for example? What a lively crowd.
Not even like performance roadblocks?
Yeah. Oh, right in the back here. I'll walk your way. Thank you very much, by the way. Over to you, Mike.
Fine, thanks. I don't know how interesting this is, but one with specifically with Android, we do a lot of NDK building, and so what we've done is just really we have our JNI layer, like the Java JNI layer, where we hook it up. We just keep that in Java, and we just build the C++ and stuff on its own and export it as an Android library, and then we have our own just Maven repository that we pull that AAR in, and it saved build times like tremendously. Just having to go down and check to see if the native stuff is up to date is usually a bottleneck. So that's I guess that's interesting. I don't know.
I don't know if you want to add any thoughts to that.
Yeah, what are you building with?
Well, we were doing the old deprecated NDK, but right now we're just using, well, CMake, so the Ninja that comes with it.
Okay, and so how do you edit your CMake stuff if it's not? I mean, like if it were tied to your Gradle build, you would be able to open, now all the native code in Studio and debug your native code and all of that. So you're kind of losing all of that. Is that a good trade-off?
Well, we maintain two branches, so I'm kind of like the NDK guy, I guess. So we have, I have a branch where I just keep that in our main project, and if we need to jump down to the LLDB and stuff and debug through something, then I have that. Otherwise, the other developers they just assume that everything we're doing with our native stuff is correct. So yeah, they just use the library that way. So we just separate it out, but I'd say most of the time we use this native code both in iOS as well as on the desktop as well. So it's kind of thrown around everywhere.
And I'm just curious, in the absence of any questions, because I know there's a lot of people here, and I know that you came specifically to this event to learn a few things. And I don't know if anybody wants to share some of the insights they're hoping to get out of this panel. Otherwise, I'll have to start making up questions. Like, for example, I'm going to put you on the spot, Philippe. Are you doing any, you've got some Android development in your build process right now, right? Right. Can I ask you just to share kind of what insight you're hoping to get out of this panel discussion today?
Sure. Thanks for pulling me into discussion. I really appreciate it. Well, first of all, I'd like to... Well, can I make a question right now? Okay. One thing that worries me about Gradle is how flexible build scripts are and how easy it is to kind of like mess up with the cacheability of scripts and easily making invalidating the inputs and stuff. So I wonder if there's anything you guys have in mind to maybe prevent people from doing that kind of stuff. For example, in large repositories, it may be hard to enforce rules that everyone follows, and if you don't know why your inputs or your tests are not being cached, it may be hard to debug or understand. It may require a good understanding of Gradle. I mean, not everyone, of course, knows about this. So, is there anything you can do to make sure builds are more like hermetic and more strict in any way, or do you guys have anything in mind about that?
Before you go on, I want to say that is a great question.
Thank you. It is a fantastic question. I have some thoughts on that. Actually, this is something that we've been recently discussing a lot. As most of you know, we've been very focused on improving performance. We feel like we're vastly approaching the point very quickly that we are more limited by some of these, I call them usability issues, that most developers won't even get near the maximum speed that they can achieve with the tools. So, we've been talking about how can we make the builds more self-optimizing almost, or at a minimum, sort of flagging a lot of these best practices. Like, I mean, during this conference, Stefan shared a lot of great tips and tricks. A lot of people shared a lot of great tips and tricks, but ideally, those things should be done in the product, right? In a very self-helping way, so that you don't have to meet with this guy to to fix your build speed. So,
yeah. So let me just add to that. Basically, this is one of the reasons there's Gradle Enterprise and build scans. On the one hand, to tell you that something's wrong with your build, and help you diagnose what is wrong with your build, and then of course the obvious next step is just fix it for me. There's a really great plugin by the Netflix guys, the Nebula lint plugin, that already allows you to lint your build and write rules to say, hey, I don't want you to write imperative code, or at least not more than one nesting level of ifs or something like that. Yeah? Please make your build scripts more declarative and put complex stuff in plugins, for instance. And we've also had other ideas. For instance, for the incremental builds, we've tossed around the idea of having a sandbox mode, so that, I mean, it's too expensive to do on a normal build, but so that you could validate in one of your CI jobs that all of your tasks really only touch things that they declared as inputs, and only generate stuff to the directories they declared as outputs, which would help make sure that your incremental builds and your are correct, and your cached builds are correct. But yeah, I think Gradle Enterprise is going to help with a lot of these questions, like why did our build get slower, or why did this fail? You can just compare two builds and see, oh yeah, there's an input change here, or something changed but the task didn't rerun. Might also be interesting. So I think it's going to answer a lot of those questions.
Yeah, so I mean, we're talking about two things here, right? Build correctness and optimized performance, right? Not necessarily the same issues, right? So there is no linting is for me the answer very often to basically for build maintainability, right? So the use cases you had in mind, for example, that it's easy to make a task non-cacheable. Is that what you said? So your custom task, or because what type of task would that be? What is your experience? How did this happen to you, basically?
Yeah, please.
We have two main use case for us. We have two monorepos, one for mobile apps and one for Java services. For Java services, like a 600 project repository, where people, every project has their own build.gradle file, and people can do like almost whatever they want in there, right? So that means they can easily make sure they can easily make everyone else's builds lower if even though they don't mean to do that. That's easy. That's something that can easily be done because there's too much flexibility, maybe in my opinion. Yep. So that's the kind of thing that I want you to address is maybe it's too flexible. Is there any way to address this in a way to prevent people to make mistakes?
Yeah, so there are two different things, right? So you could today say, hey, no, you can only configure in those build scripts, right? You're not everything else has to be in a plugin, right? You're not allowed. You could enforce with Gradle that no one could add a task, right, or do all the stuff that you have described, right? But then at the same time, then they need a huge basically build team that basically picks up their requirement and implements it for them. Yeah. So there is a trade-off, right? So when you're saying it's so in that respect, if that is your organizational priority, you can define those rules. There is a lint plugin. The Gradle has many hooks where you can basically cut your developers off from doing any of those changes, right? So then the flexibility is gone, but things are more stable. Is that something that would fit the culture at your organization?
Yeah, that's exactly what I have in mind. We're going to end up having a parent plugin where everyone uses that plugin to configure their own build.gradle files or their own projects, and then the set of options that you're allowed to, the set of things you're allowed to do is more restricted in a way that's like more tailored to the needs of the team and the project. So
Yep.
you know.
So that is something with a reasonable amount of investment, you could achieve that today.
Yeah.
It's not completely out of the box. There's one external plugin, right, the lint plugin, but that is possible, right?
Yeah.
So if that is, and again, too much flexibility is like, it's the context for your organization because it's a huge monorepo build, right, where every developer has a high leverage. Netflix would say, no. For us, this is not too much flexibility, right? We have the freedom and responsibility philosophy. Developers can do whatever the hell they want in their repository. We have a multi-repo. That's why we have a multi-repo philosophy. So it depends on the context, and you can. It's not that out of the box, right? Of course, it would be nicer if out of the box you could set certain modes with Gradle, right? But you have the toolkits to implement that pretty easily. That's one thing. The other thing is there are many things we can do. So that, for example, one thing we entertaining is we say the output of a task is an auto-generated directory, right? So that this becomes a complete implementation detail that by default, right, unless you try very hard, it will be impossible for two tasks writing into the same output directory, which disables cacheability. So we could say, oh, there's an absolute path in the cache key. That doesn't sound like a good idea, right? So that would be going into all the details and informing people, right? Is that really what you want to do, right? So basically what you pointed out, James, right? So, but you see there are many dimensions of your question.
Yeah, it was a tricky question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool, but your answer definitely addresses. Yeah, I think the answer is pretty much having a plugin and enforcing the company standards and rules in a way that's easy for people to follow. Right?
Thank you, Philippe. And I'm going to open the floor to another question. Otherwise, I'm going to start picking people again. And if you're in the back, that doesn't mean you're safe.
But sorry. Because there is if you look at successful monorepo builds, they usually have a well-staffed build team, right, that has huge bandwidth to then implement all those requirements. So there is an investment you need to take. You cannot just say, oh, I take this freedom away from your developers, but I have no time to do anything for you. So usually, you could also argue it reflects that you are not providing better structure for them and more tailored solutions, right? Let's say your own declarative elements for the typical things your developers need to do, that they are forced to do this kind of semi-educated hacky stuff. So there's also, you can also reflect as an organization, why is this happening? Is this just because they are whatever, right? Or do we force them to do this kind of stuff?
Actually, sounds like a potential Gradle enterprise feature, right? To allow people to set this sort of policies.
Yeah.
You like?
Yeah.
It's like,
Interesting stuff. Any volunteers? I think everybody just wants to. Oh, we got some over here. Good. I was about to start picking on people. I'll start here because you're closest.
Kind of similar to the previous question. There are a lot of places where it's sort of the Gradle API kind of invites you to almost do the wrong thing at times. Like if you create a custom task in your build script just because you want to do some quick one-off thing, but then if you just put anything in the curly braces, that all gets done in configuration time, and then it just sort of happens. Any thoughts around either from the higher level like API design to try to de-risk that and sort of coerce engineers into doing the right thing more often than not, or at least having tooling around like, hey, like this actually is like probably not what you want to do. This is a regression, causing a regression here, etc. Things like that.
So yeah, the tooling is already happening with build scans right now. So they will tell you, hey, there's something going on here in your build script. It's resolving dependencies at configuration time. Or one other thing that we'll tackle is this build script is doing I/O at configuration time, at least the I/O that Gradle can intercept. So we'll already tell you this is probably not what you want. You're doing something wrong here. what we also want to do is separate the tasks from their inputs better, and basically have the action be much more clear, and the separation of action and configuration, so that it's clearer for the user that here's the definition of what this task does, and here's the inputs. And that is also important for the parallelism safety, right? So we have this worker API, but right now you need to kind of call that from your task action. And what we really want to do is you define the action that you will submit to the worker, and then you just configure a task. And I think really what we want to encourage in the future is just not doing these ad hoc tasks in your build script, because they also destroy cacheability. Like just writing do last in your build script is going to give you a non-cacheable task. What we really want you to do is write a task class or a worker action in the future, and then only write the declarative parts. And then it's very clear, anything you write in your build script is the declarative part. So if you do something expensive there, it's wrong. So basically, make that distinction much clearer. Anything that does work is in a plugin, somewhere in build source, for instance, and build scripts configure that. So at least that's my take. I'm really not a big fan of inline do last stuff.
But I agree with you. This is one area, right, where the API suggests something different than what is happening. Right, and everyone is surprised about that at the beginning. And even if they know, they forget about it. Say, oh, why is this not? I forgot about it. Because it suggests, yeah, this configuration happens only as a part of this when I execute this task, and it's not happening all the time. So we think about it for a while. I mean, the configuration model was one experiment, right? The new one to deal with that. So the one thing that would be a result of what you have been saying is that we're saying that we model this stronger, so that this configuration is only executed if the task is executed. Then it would suggest the right thing. At the moment, it does not, right? So this point is well taken. That is something we want to improve, right? Because many people fall into this trap, and it's not intuitive. So yes, I agree with you.
Another part of that is just like, I think people tend to write, like using the task example, they write that because that's also the simplest way to write it. And so trying to make the simplest way the right way more often than not also helps with that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, at the same time, there's also something to be said for some quick experimentations, right? Like, it's like when doing code. I just write this in this method and I see, now this method is 40 lines long. Now I need to refactor, right? So in a way, there's also something to be said that at a certain point in time, for doing some quick experimentation might be okay, but then you have to immediately say, hey, now I need to refactor that somewhere else. So you see, but no, I agree with your point. I still cannot fully translate it at this point. How would it look like in Gradle? What you said would be ideal, right? Yeah.
Another question right over here.
So there's been a lot of focus on local and remote caching, and with the Android stuff eventually being updated to have properly cacheable tasks, compile avoidance, all these things to reduce the amount of things that we're going to compile. Ultimately, some changes will just result in a bunch of steps being executed, a bunch of tasks, and Android has more tasks, more computationally expensive tasks than like a simple Java project. Hans, I think at DroidCon New York last year, you mentioned that offloading work to remote workers was something. I haven't heard anything about that, though, in the last year. So could you maybe just talk a little bit about that, if that's still part of the plan for optimizing that?
Absolutely. The only thing is I don't want to, there's so much stuff we want to do, right? I don't want to make this kind of, we do all this that we want to do. So that's why I intentionally said this work that we're doing for the second half of the year is a scheduled work, right? For us, at the latest, we have to tackle that in 2018, right? remote execution, and there are different layers of that, right? So one is let's say you have a huge monorepo, right? And IntelliJ is already eating up a lot of your resources. Just being able to say, hey, Gradle, now the build, please do this on a different machine, right? Even though it's only one machine, but it's an additional machine, right? So the first step will be remote execution. And the second step will then be a smart distributed execution of a build, right? Which is not trivial to do it in a way that it's that it's faster, but that is the second step. So we absolutely will go in this direction, right? That is basically, for me, the next booster for increasing maximum build performance, right? At the same time, we also want to consolidate a bit, because the reality is that many organizations are now far away from the current maximum build performance. So there will be some focus, what can we do to make it easier for them to get there? But otherwise, it's key, right, what you're proposing, the way we see. We also have the vision that build in CI is kind of, it's getting closer together. So it's, again, I don't know when we do that, but I want to see a Gradle maybe in 2018 where you not just where you can say, okay, I want to define a composite, right, with an Android app that is on my machine and a backend service that is on a different machine. And I want to run this composite build in continuous mode, that whenever the backend service changes, right, someone commits something, I want to pick this up. Does it make sense? Right, but this happens remotely because the backend service is way too big to build on my machine. So this is where we want to go to, right? I don't like to talk that much about it because it's not scheduled yet. So I'm not sure when this is happening. But for me, it must be for a capability of a build system at one point in time to be able to do that, right? It's the final scalability barrier, right? Especially for large monorepo builds, right? At one point, all what we're doing, depending on how much you increase your monorepo, will not scale anymore. There are just limitations locally. So yeah.
Just one more point about that. We created this new worker API that you heard about quite a lot now, and that is also a step in that direction. Defining work in an isolated, parallelizable way, which also means we can relatively easily move those work items to other machines. It's really an efficiency question, because some of those inputs could be very big, and so if you send for instance, the class path over the wire for every single file, that's going to be too expensive. So there's going to need to be some smarts in there, but it's definitely a step in the right direction to isolate the work so that we can execute somewhere else. And right now, that somewhere else is a different process on the same machine, but the idea is pretty easy to imagine. Well, it's a different process on a different machine.
Great stuff. And to keep it going, we've got one right here.
So if you ever try to open an old project on Android Studio, it will bombard you with like 30 different upgrade this, upgrade that, upgrade Gradle plugin, upgrade Gradle, and it is overwhelming experience to some point where I just go and start a new project instead because it's much easier. Are you guys you have something in mind where we'd be like one button and click, yes, please upgrade me to everything new. I just don't want to deal with this.
Yeah, we are aware of the bumpiness of version upgrades. Exactly what you said. Basically, we ask you to upgrade a million things and one after another. We don't even do it in one step. It is in our next quarter OKR to improve it, but that's.
Yeah, it's not, the main issue behind it is that, we have to be extremely careful when we sync to get all the errors from the Gradle plugin in a way that, allows us to keep syncing, right? So for example, when we resolve dependencies, we resolve them in a way that's linear so that if they fail, we don't throw an exception, because if the whole sync throws an exception, then Studio just get an exception and it has no information, and then the sync completely failed. So now we have the more helpful case where it says, sync succeeded with failures, which is a little bit confusing, but that's basically that the sync action succeeded, we got some results, and part of those results is there's a model and there's some errors. But it's not yet the case that we get all the errors that we want. there's some cases where there's an error that happens and then we can't really continue, and then it stops some process that doesn't get all the errors, and so you fix this one and then you sync, and then the sync goes a little bit further inside the Gradle plugin, and then say, okay, well, now I'm past that error, but then I discovered I have another error. So that's kind of tricky. There's probably, I don't really have anyone on top of my head, but there's some errors where once you get into that state, you really can't do anything else, and we can detect that there's other error down the line. So as much as we want to improve it, I can't guarantee that we're going to be in a place where we're able to sync, and then we get 200 errors, and you click one button, and it solves all of them, and then you solve every single error. There's going to be always cases where we're kind of stuck after, because the first error prevents us from finding the other errors. But we do want to improve that as much as we can.
And before we move to the next question, we've got about 10 minutes left, so that should be enough time for 2 or 3 questions to get in there. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to address to the panel? Oh, thank you.
This is kind of a random question, and I'm not sure if it's actually something that I should be asking you guys or JetBrains, but one pattern that comes up a lot now is just using a dependencies.gradle file and applying everything from there, but we get no real IDE support for that. Maybe having Kotlin build scripts will help with getting better IDE support and linking these together, but are there any thoughts around this? I know that we had some recent changes either in Android Studio or IntelliJ, or that it would at least start detecting like root project extensions and being able to pull those up in autocomplete. But yeah, it's a very specific question about just using the dependencies.gradle pattern.
Yeah, so I think that's going to be addressed by Gradle script Kotlin. So, I mean, it's got to be somehow a strongly typed extension. So that could be a little tricky, because if your dependencies are just a map, then we can't really provide autocompletion for that map. So I'm not sure what level of autocompletion you expect there.
I guess kind of basically what we already got with the root project autocompletion that is in Android Studio now, but just not just for root project extensions, but if you're applying it from like a dependencies.gradle file. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
I'm not sure what you mean with root project extensions.
So like a common pattern is you could basically define your dependencies in like your root build Gradle file, and you put them basically in your extensions block, and then in your sub projects you would say like compile deps dot whatever, or you'd say root projects dot deps dot whatever, and that has autocompletion now in Android Studio. I think I'm looking over at the Android people for
interesting. I'm not aware of
reassurance
that
here.
Because that's completely dynamic. So I mean, we could do something like that with Gradle script Kotlin. We already generate a lot of code from dynamic extensions, like the extensions that plugins add, like the Android block or the application block from the application plugin, etc., etc. Those are auto-generated and then picked up by the editor again.
Just for me to understand the use case better. So what you are basically saying, right? You factor your build logic into separate .gradle files, right? One is dependencies, whatever that is, right? And you want to have basically content assist wherever you are in your Gradle, in whatever Gradle script you are. Is that basically, is that what you?
Yeah, it could.
What's content assist for dynamic things that he defined?
Well, it's not necessarily dynamic. They might be statically defined too. It could also be like actual functions that or helper methods I've written somewhere as well. Like those don't show up either.
Yeah, I need to understand
I can show you an example.
Yeah,
after.
that would be cool.
So basically, if it's a type that Gradle understands, like we understand extensions, we understand conventions, which are going to be deprecated, but anyway, we understand configurations. Yeah. So we look into those collections and then propose them to you through code generation. So we look like when you apply the Android plugin, for instance, and we look at the plugins block. we find out, okay, the Android plugin is there, so there's this, in the extensions container, there's now an extension called Android of type Android extension, and then we just generate a method called Android that returns, or that takes a closure with the Android extension so that Kotlin can pick that up. So what you're saying is you just say X libraries equals, and then you just have a map. You can't really generate code easily from a map. That's so I guess the JetBrains guys have written some code that just parses that pattern, which is not something that we can like easily replicate in a generic way. But yeah, I guess the idea is we collect use cases and then see how we can support them. So I mean, there's lots of stuff you can do with Kotlin to generate some statically typed code. So let's see how we can support you there.
And one exercise I'm looking forward to. So the initial goal, right, for our Kotlin DSL was to no surprises for the existing Gradle. So model is as much as possible to the current Groovy DSL, right, and then generate extension methods on the fly, right, and I think that is key, right, for people to easily migrate, right, and we get a lot of benefits from that. So there's easy migration with a lot of benefits. For me, the next iteration, and I talked also with Andre from the Kotlin team, is now really think, what does it mean that we now have a statically compiled language as a foundation, right? How has Groovy, basically with a dynamic language, influenced the design of the DSL? So, and then work really with the Kotlin guys, because the JetBrains guys have tremendous also DSL perspective, right, in their DNA, right, and they're talking about DSLs for a decade now, right? They're pioneers in this area. Then really think, hey, so how can we maybe introduce new DSL concepts, right, that are specific for Kotlin to make certain things kind of more fluent and work out of the box without treating them as a special case. So that's a future exercise, right? But it's certainly something I'm looking forward to.
It's actually something in my mind. I just had an idea that might actually work. So Kotlin allows you to write very terse properties. So you could actually turn your dependencies.gradle into a file that has a single type that just has properties that have the name of your library, which return the coordinates for that library. And then we just need to fix the plugin mechanism so that this type is visible to your build script that applies that dependencies.gradle plugin. And then you get autocompletion because it's just another extension, your library's extension, for instance. And then you can just call those methods or properties in Kotlin. So I think there's ways through that problem.
I mean, I like that idea, but I think it would be better if it was we generated that class, right? That Kotlin class, and then from some basic metadata text file that then we want to build a good project structure dialog that allow you to use a UI to just edit stuff, and I don't want to go and have to have that dialog edit some random Kotlin class. I want to edit some basic text file, right? And so I think we should generate that on the fly and just make that a standard feature of the plugin or Gradle itself.
And we definitely have time for one final question, and I'm just going to go with the first hand I see. Right there, perfect. Because otherwise, inevitably at this point, like everybody's got 3 questions and we're out of time. So I'll pass this to you.
So now we get Kotlin for Android officially, but then tooling is still a bit behind. For example, most notably, we don't get the instant app support for Kotlin and lint checks from the command line, so we only get them in ID. So is it something that you want to address in the near future? And more importantly, is it something that you will that you're set for Java and Kotlin to be always equal, or Kotlin will lag behind because we'll focus on new features, for example, for Java, and only then for Kotlin?
No, I mean, our goal is to support both of them. I'm not sure what the problem is with this instant app and Kotlin, but it just sounds more like a bug rather than an actual things that we decided to not do. And lint is probably also just an oversight. We just need to fix that, hopefully in time for 3.0.
And we might actually be able to squeeze one more in if anybody has one final question to add. Otherwise, if I could ask the panelists, oh, here we go. We got 2 in a row. I'll let you guys arm wrestle that out. Here, I'll pass that over here.
So Android's had variants for a long time, and now that they're natively in the Gradle model, do you guys have any thinking around how to propagate that with binaries coming from like a Maven repository or something?
So that's already in the planning, basically. It's needed for both native, so when you want to publish native libraries, and there's also lots of interest from other users to have that, and have additional metadata, like this library has been successful in production. So maybe I want to select that instead of just the latest. I want to select something that's good. So basically, publishing richer metadata is something that we're definitely going to do.
Yeah. So for me, this is a key element for better multi-repo world, right? So that you for me it's three areas, right? For better binary dependency management. I think in a multi-repo world, you need to have some form of dynamic dependencies, right? More like semantic versioning is richer than what you can do with Gradle right now. And you need to have some form of locking, right? That you have reproducible results. You never want to publish dynamic dependency. You only want to, as a consumer, define them, but then be able to lock them down. And the third thing, you want to have additional variants, right? So for me, those are three, and they go together. As you said, hey, give me the latest with that variant, right? And that variant can be group artifact version. It can be 32-bit, but it can also be basically QA state run successfully in production, right? So for us, this is a whole set of problems we wanna attack over the next 6 to 12 months until this is really a complete solution. So absolutely, it's not scheduled yet, right? We haven't said, oh, we're gonna start with that at point X, but I hope we can start with that soon in the second half of the year. Super excited about that.
That's a great note to finish on. And I just want to take a moment and thank everybody for their participation, voluntary and otherwise. And how about a round of applause for our panelists, everybody?